Modern man has hitherto found it a great comfort to believe that in his efforts to search and discover, to record and catalogue, he has left no forest unexplored, no crevice unlit, and no creature unnamed. It is said that there are no hidden reaches into which human sight has never ventured, and no occurrences which can defy the infallible forces of human knowledge and reason. Man chooses, with great conviction, to believe that there is nothing alien left on earth. This prejudice allows him to recline in feelings of relative safety, secure in the belief of his own omnipotence. Maybe it is in order to protect this belief that accounts of things alien and unexplained are reacted to with fervent denial. Maybe it is just human nature to resist any revelation that cannot be easily dealt with. Regardless of whether it is a modern prejudice or an ancient impulse, the compulsion to disbelieve that which would not require a shift in perception is doubtless what has confined me to this institution. Man is much more eager to believe in the hopeless fragility of his own mind than he is to believe in foul, hidden-away worlds and nameless horrors beneath the earth. You, who reads this manuscript, I'm sure, are less interested in my speculations about human belief than you are in the circumstances which resulted in my commitment to a psychiatric care facility. I do not know precisely what compels me to commit this story to paper. Perhaps it is out of a desire to share my experience, or my perceived experience, as it is referred to in some company, with the world. More likely it is out of a need to relieve the pressure exerted on my mind by its memory. Whatever the reason may be, the enlightenment of the world to a terrible truth, or the medicine of my troubled brain, I will, to the best of my ability in the pages that follow, relive the strange and terrible events that befell me in those horrid caverns beneath the forest. At the time of the occurrences in question, I was a young man, recently graduated with a degree in botany from a small but richly historied college in Massachusetts. I soon found myself employed with the Natural Resources Department of British Columbia, having desired immediately to conduct field research. My first real opportunity to do so occurred when I was assigned to conduct a surveying of the native flora within a certain selection of a remote national forest. The trip there was a long one, up lonely highways where the towns grew fewer and farther between, and winding back roads that looked as if they had been untraveled for years. At the outside, I had been excited about the isolation for all its implications of a natural ecosystem uninfluenced by human activities. Driving further north, however, as I watched the green fields and sparse sunlit forests give way to dark looming pines, I began to feel a sense of unease, as if I was traveling to the edge of the world. I dismissed these misgivings as irrational, and as I continued on, I slowly grew accustomed to my surroundings. After 3 days spent driving, I arrived at the small village that was the last outpost before the vast expanse of the national forest. Upon seeing a faded sign advertising a diner, I was suddenly aware of both the fact that I was extremely hungry and that I had grown dreadfully tired of fast food. I pulled into the near vacant parking lot and parked my car near the entrance. A bell rang above the door as I entered. I glanced around the place and saw a few well-broken-in booths and a time-worn bar with metal stools. Besides me and the owner, there were only 3 other people to be seen: a couple in the far booth who did not look up from their food, and an old man who eyed me suspiciously from the bar. I sat down at the end of the bar opposite to the old man and picked up a menu. I did not feel his eyes leave me as I read. "What brings you round here?" asked the owner, after I had read him my order. He was a large, tired-faced man who looked to be in his late 40s. A faded tattoo of an anchor and rope showed halfway out of the sleeve of his worn t-shirt. "We don't see too many new faces up this way, if you ain't already guessed." "I'm from the Department of Natural Resources," I replied. "I'm here to conduct a survey of the forest." I heard the old man scoff at me, and I turned in his direction. "You best watch yourself out in those woods," grumbled the old man. seeing he had caught my attention. What do you mean by that?" I asked him, confused and somewhat intrigued by this statement. He ignored my question and grumbled on. "There's things out in them trees, things that ain't supposed to be seen by the likes of you and me." "What sort of things?" I questioned. "You just get in and out of those woods as quickly as you can, and pray you don't find out," he replied in a low voice, raising a gnarled finger at me in warning. "Knock it off, Gus," interjected the owner. "Why do you gotta try to scare the kid with that nonsense?" "I'm just trying to tell him something he might need to know," the old man complained. "Yeah, well, he don't need to know none of your loony stories," the owner replied. "I was done talking to him anyway," grumbled the old man as he laid his money down onto the bar and walked out of the front door. I was left puzzled and somewhat unnerved by his words. "You don't mind nothing old Gus says," the owner reassured me. "Thought it wouldn't do you no harm to be careful in those woods. Gets dark early in the thick of those trees. It's real easy to lose your way and real hard to find it again. There's been a few people gone missing in those trees." He cast his eyes to the door that the old man had just left through. "Happened to Gus's kid." The atmosphere had become awkward after that exchange. I ate my meal quickly and left without another meaningful word. As I started my car and drove the short distance to the small motel that I had been told would accommodate me, I found it difficult to forget the old man's words. Surely it had just been a manifestation of backwoods superstition, developed after a life spent in the shadow of the mighty forest. I tried to dismiss it. The motel fit the faded atmosphere of the old town exactly as one might have suspected. The room I was pointed to by the disinterested old woman at the front door was a small one, occupied by only a bed and a small wooden desk. The final rays of the sun now disappeared over the treetops, shone through a cracked window pane, casting my shadow upon the faded wallpaper. I set my suitcase down on the bed and opened it. I took out the map of the forest that I'd been given by the department before I set out on my trip and laid it out on the desk. As I looked the map over, I was struck by the forest's massive scale. It was countless times the size of the tiny town I now stood in, which occupied the bottom left corner of the map. The section I had been sent to survey was itself of a considerable size, and mile after mile of trees stretched beyond it. Past the trees were a few small mountains, and scarcely another human being in that direction. The words I heard in the diner echoed in my mind. I pushed them to the back of my mind and planned the course I would take tomorrow. I planned to enter the forest the next morning at a point on the east edge of town and travel in a horseshoe pattern that would take me several miles into the forest and bring me out on the other side of town about an hour before sunset. Satisfied that there was no reason my venture would not be successful, I decided it was time I should get some sleep. A very peculiar dream troubled me that night. I found myself wandering amongst the trunks of great black trees. I was wrought with a feeling of great unease, as if I was being watched by some terrible entity that lurked in every shadow. I lacked the faintest idea of where I was or how I had come to be there, but I felt that I needed to find my way out of the strange forest with the greatest urgency. As I wandered, the sense of unease I had felt transformed into a feeling of imminent danger. I began to hear bizarre screeching sounds from just outside my field of sight. Upon hearing those dreadful noises, I broke into a run. I soon found, however, that I seemed only to travel deeper into the forest. The trees grew wider and taller as the sky grew darker and lower, until the two seemed to meet above me. The shadows closed in, and the horrible noises echoing out of them grew louder. My breathing grew faster and shallower as I ran deeper into the forest. The trees ceased to look like anything organic, becoming great pillars of black stone. The sky pressed down farther, till it was like a great stone ceiling. The sounds from the shadows grew unbearably loud and began to resemble those of metal screeching against metal. I had run until I felt my chest would burst when, all of a sudden, the ground in front of me fell away like a waterfall of soil and stone, leaving only a sheer vertical drop into oblivion. I stopped abruptly, inches from the edge. I stared for a moment in disbelief at the endless expanse of black nothingness that yawned in front of me, before something compelled me to whirl back around in the direction of the forest cavern. It was the sound. They had grown impossibly loud, and they seemed to be closing in. The shadows likewise closed in around me, bringing the screeching and scraping cacophony upon me. I glimpsed formless black shapes in the edge of the shadow, creeping toward me, patient for the advance of the shadows to allow them to reach me. One of the forms darted towards me. Unable to stop myself, I instinctively recoiled backwards. I tumbled back into the void. I sat up with a ragged gasp. I was drenched in a cold sweat, the feeling of falling not gone from my stomach, and the echo of the abrasive noises not gone from my ears. Never in my life had I endured a dream of such vividity. I blamed it upon the strangeness of my environment and the peculiar warning I had received the previous night, but it had still shaken me. I fell back onto my mattress and laid my hands over my face as I caught my breath. When the physical symptoms of terror had left my body, I sat up once more and surveyed the room. Nothing was changed from the night before. My suitcase still lay open on the floor beside the desk, the light of morning streaming in through the window. I knew I needed to get started on my day's plan, and with a shuddering sigh, I lifted myself out of bed and got dressed. It was a cool, dry morning. Only a few wispy clouds hung over my head as I got in my car and drove back to the same diner where the exchange likely responsible for my nightmare had taken place to eat breakfast. This time the diner was completely empty, except for me and a young man behind the counter, who looked as if he would much rather still be asleep. I ate my breakfast without a word. Though I had decided I would forego lunch that day and knew I would likely soon be stricken with hunger, I felt little desire to eat. My mind was still plagued by the recollection of the nameless shapes that lurched and crawled through the shadows of my nightmare forest. If the sleepy youth behind the counter noticed my tension, he did not show it, and I left without any sort of conversation. I climbed back into my car and tried to clear my mind as I drove to the mouth of the thin trail that would lead me on my expedition. I rolled down the windows to let in the cool morning air and took a few deep breaths. I began to feel better as I watched the morning sunlight stream across the branches of small trees and cast dancing shadows upon the quiet old buildings of that little town. It was just a dream. Rational men don't fear dreams, I thought to myself, as I turned off the worn pavement onto a dirt road. After a few minutes spent driving down the sunny dirt road, I felt quite at ease. In no time at all, the road narrowed, and I parked in the grass beside it. I stepped out of my car, taking from the passenger seat the backpack of materials I had packed that morning. I shouldered the bag and looked up at the towering pines that marked the end of where my car could take me. I took a deep breath of the crisp morning air and began down the path into the forest. The first few hours I spent in the forest were relatively uneventful, although I did take note of the fact that there were far fewer animals to be seen than I had expected, which, at the time, I attributed to some undetermined effect of the local air or water that had taken place since the last survey was conducted a decade prior. After some time had passed, however, and I had traveled several miles into the forest, I began to feel uneasy. I would occasionally be moved to glance over my shoulder by the feeling that I was being watched. Each time I did, memories of my nightmare caused me to shudder. These feelings grew in frequency and intensity as I ventured deeper into the quiet, looming pines. Soon, another feeling arrived to accompany them. This was the feeling that I was intruding. I began to be troubled, without knowing why, by the thought that I was not meant to walk on the cold ground between the mighty trunks of these ancient trees. I was musing on these strange thoughts when I was jolted to alertness by a strange noise. Some terrible, abrasive fusion of a screech and a squeal, like bone rasping against rotten wood, long, loud, and guttural. After the initial shock of the sound, an awful realization grasped me. Despite how terrible and otherworldly it was, the sound had unmistakably been produced by a living organism. My mind raced with thoughts of the thing in the woods that the old man in the diner had warned me of when a terrified deer burst out of the foliage a few feet in front of me. Running from the direction that the sound had come from, the animal did not so much as acknowledge my presence as it raced across the trail and disappeared into the ferns and bushes on the other side. For the brief moment it had been in view, I thought I had glimpsed in its eye an expression of sheer terror. When I reflect now on what I did next, I curse my foolishness. I still do not know what compelled me to leave the trail and search for the source of that terrible screech. Perhaps it was simply curiosity, but I believe it was more likely out of a desire to prove to myself that my fears had been unfounded, that there were no things, not in the forest or anywhere else. I followed the impulse of the scientific man and sought a rational explanation for what seemed unnatural and strange. Following this impulse, I turned off the made trail and began to make my way along the path the terrified deer had made through the brush. As I walked, pushing branches and plants out of my way, I heard another sound from the direction I was heading. They were quieter, but still unmistakably of the same source as the first. My mind flailed and gasped in search of any natural explanation for these hideous sounds, but I could not think of a single one. I was filled with both creeping dread and utter bafflement as I stumbled through the brush. After a handful of seconds that felt like hours, I broke through the brush and into a small clearing in the woods. There, on the floor of dead brown needles, I saw it. Looming over the bloodied body of the unlikely companion of the first deer I had seen was the creature, the thing that I had been warned about. I stared, blinking and stared once more. Upon realizing that my eyes were not deceived, my mind acted to save itself, and I fainted dead away. I could not hazard a guess as to how long I remained unconscious, but it must have been no insignificant amount of time. My mind was firmly committed to preserving its sanity by making me oblivious to my surroundings, but there at last came a point that the physical sensations of my body overcame the wishes of my unconscious mind. When I awoke, it took me several seconds to get a bearing on my surroundings. At first, all I knew was that I was being dragged across the floor of rough stone, and I had an intense pain in my right ankle. I then realized with tremendous shock and horror that I was being dragged by the creature from the forest. The tunnel or cavern I was in was sparsely lit by some manner of bioluminescent fungus or lichen, and I was able to see the creature's insect-like head with its mandibles clamped around my ankle. I began desperately considering any possible means I may have to escape. For a fleeting moment, I was terrified that the thing had noticed my awakening, but if it had, it did not show it. I concluded that it must have much poorer eyesight than myself. I tried to take stock of my situation. My backpack had apparently been ripped off of me, so I was without even the poorest weapon. It was nearly impossible to think straight while this thing was dragging me across the abrasive, rock-littered floor. Then an idea struck me. I did not particularly like it. It involved not only an element of uncertainty, but also a time spent waiting. However, I could think of no alternative. I waited for what felt like aeons, but could really have only been a few minutes. The floor tore my clothes. My flesh burned with pain where the mandibles held me. I strained my eyes in the dim light, searching frantically, when at last my eyes landed upon the object of my quest. A loose stone on the floor, about the size of a softball, that came into a dull point on one end. It was unlikely I was going to find a better weapon, and I threw out my arm to reach it. The energy with which I flailed caused my body to shift to the right, and in response, the creature jerked me forward with considerable force. I felt a crank in my ankle and a shower of pain, then my fingers closed tightly around the stone. I steeled myself, adjusting my grip on the stone and facing the point downward. I took a deep breath and looked up at the creature. Then, with a loud cry of effort, I sat up and brought the stone down, point first on the creature's head, with all my strength. I felt the stone break through the hard shell of the creature's skull and plunge down into softer matter beneath with a sickening crunch. The creature released its grasp on my ankle and let out a gurgling screech as I fell back on the cold stone floor. I quickly sat up again, ready to defend myself from an attack by the creature, but I at once saw there was no need. The first blow had killed it. I breathed a shuddering sigh of relief and, bracing against the rough wall of the cavern, tried to lift myself to my feet. Once I had managed to stand up, I limped over, favoring my left foot, to look at the creature. The old man in the diner had said that the things in the forest were not meant to be seen, and upon looking closely at one of them, I found myself in complete agreement. The thing that lay on the stones before me, illuminated by the dim glow of the walls, was a sight never meant for human eyes. It was roughly 6 feet in length, insect-like in general outline, having 6 jointed legs, ending in bony, hook-like appendages, as well as a mandible head resembling that of a termite. Its body, however, seemed to possess a fleshy, rubbery quality that distinguished it from being totally insectoid. The dim light glistening off what appeared to be a slimy coat on the creature's body. A whitish-green fluid ran out onto the cavern floor from the cracks around the stone wedge that was still lodged in the creature's skull. It emanated a foul, acidic smell. I marveled at the monstrosity, still in disbelief at the existence of such a creature. After a few moments passed, a thought crossed my mind that turned my blood to ice. The thought had been one of the old man's words. Things in the woods. Things. I realized that there was no reason for me to believe that the monster I killed had been the only one, and wherever I was now, I was deep within the territory of its kind. It became apparent to me that I was still in great danger as long as I remained in those tunnels. Conscious of how little time I may have until another creature passed through the tunnel I was in, I started trying to find my way back out. Having no idea of what direction out may be, I began traveling down the tunnel in the direction opposite to the one I had been dragged in. I was only able to move frustratingly slow due to the injury to my ankle. Each step caused a stab of pain to rush up my right leg. I was encouraged at first by the fact that the floor of the tunnel I walked up sloped upwards, and I hoped it would bring me to the surface fairly quickly. However, after nearly 20 agonizing minutes of staggering through the cold, damp tunnel, it became clear to me that I was far deeper underground than I had thought. Continuing on my way, I soon reached a fork in the tunnel. This was what I had been dreading. I had no way of knowing which tunnel would bring me to the surface and which would carry me further into the realm of the creatures. I was about to choose a tunnel at random and hope for the best when I heard a sound from the tunnel to the left. It was a persistent, hollow tapping. I realized with horror that I had heard the sound before. I had heard it when the creature was dragging me down the tunnel. Footsteps. Listening closer, I could hear that the sounds coming from the tunnel before me were faster and more irregular and growing louder. By my reckoning, this indicated 2 or 3 creatures traveling down the tunnel in my direction. My breath caught in my throat. I immediately ducked into the tunnel to my right and started to scramble down it as fast as I could, dragging my right foot behind me. After a few minutes moving at this pace, I stopped to catch my breath. When my heart stopped hammering in my ears, I became aware of a quiet sound drifting back down the tunnel from the way I had come. My heart skipped a beat and then resumed its hammering. One of the creatures was moving down the tunnel behind me in my direction. Suddenly, my exhausted limbs blazed with energy. I lurched and stumbled down the tunnel, heedless of the pain that stabbed upon my ankle. Heedless of the pain that stabbed up from my ankle. Heedless of the fact that the tunnel I now traveled was sloping downward. The only thought that occupied my mind was that in my current condition, facing another creature in the narrow, dark tunnel would mean certain death. I staggered on further, urged forward by thoughts of mandibles and hooked insect limbs tearing my flesh from my bones. I took no notice of the fact that the clumps of glowing fungi grew thicker and more frequent, filling the tunnel with a pale green light. I was nearly at the point of collapsing when I turned a corner in the tunnel and was stopped in my tracks with horror. The stone before me fell away into a steep vertical drop. However, unlike in my nightmare, the drop did not lead away into nothingness. No. What I saw when I fell to my knees with horror and stared over that cliff was far worse. The stone wall fell vertically for at least 200 feet before it terminated in the bottom of a tremendous pit. The pit was lit by the sickly green light from the thick ropes of glowing fungus that hung far above me. I saw that the tunnel I looked out from was one of the dozens that perforated the sheer stone walls of the pit. From those tunnels streamed the creatures. Hundreds of them. Thousands of them. They crawled up and down the rough walls, in and out of the tunnel mouths, and they covered the floor of the pit. At the bottom of the pit, in the center of teeming, screeching masses of the creatures, was the most terrible sight of all. The Queen. It was larger than the other creatures, much larger, the length of 20 ordinary creatures. Its body was a great mass of whitish-gray, undulating flesh that seemed to glow in the unwholesome light. The creatures swarmed around its immobile bulk. Before its head was a cluster of creatures who offered it chunks of bloody flesh, which it occasionally leaned down and grabbed into its mandibles. I was sickened by the realization that I had just witnessed what my fate would have been had I not awoken and killed the creature that had taken me here. My mind was soon torn away from this thought by another horrible scene. The Queen let out a low, gurgling sound. Its sides collapsed inward. A wriggling white larva emerged from its abdomen, and at once 2 adult creatures took hold of it and carried it off deeper by way of a tunnel in the base of the wall. At once, I was on my feet. I turned back and lurched up the tunnel from where I had come, heedless of the creature that may still occupy it, caring only about distancing myself from that foul chamber. My mind spun as I stumbled, bending under the strain of what I had witnessed. I heard the sound of my own hysterical laughter echoing off the walls of the tunnel. I felt tears running down my face. Pain. Terror. Then, mercifully, darkness. I have no recollection of what else occurred that night. I only know that I must have escaped the tunnels, for when I next awoke, I was in a clean white bed in a brightly lit medical ward with my ankle in a cast. When I inquired as to what happened to me, I was politely informed by an orderly that I was found by a search party 2 days after I had ventured into the forest. I had apparently been hysterical when I was found and had told the search party all of what I experienced, and I had been committed to the Clearview Sanitarium. I have been kept here for the past 2 years. I have been told that what I experienced was, in reality, the sudden onset of a mental condition. My broken ankle had been explained as the result of stumbling in the forest. My scrapes and cuts have been explained as the result of running through brushes and thorns. My story has been dismissed as a grand hallucination. My warnings of the rapidly multiplying legions of nightmare creatures in hidden caverns have been dismissed as deluded paranoia. In short, I have been labeled a madman. What most torments me in this facility is the knowledge that humanity still remains ignorant to what I have learned. I have learned that there are places on Earth that man does not own. There are creatures that man has not faced and must never face, for they harbor no fear of man. Every day that man reclines in the serene illusion that he is master of all the earth, the creatures who live outside his sight grow in numbers and strength. Each day that man remains ignorant, he grows weaker in comparison. I pray this ignorance does not destroy us.
I ordered myself on the dark web. The title is weird, I know. But if you can just give me a moment, I'll explain. I'll have to be fast though. I don't know how close they are. Essentially, I ordered myself on the dark web. I'm a drug user, I'll admit it. Weed is my usual go-to. But I buy that off my friend. If, however, I want to get something a little heavier, like acid or coke, I just order it off the dark web. It's surprisingly simple. A few clicks, some Bitcoin transfers, and then boom, I have acid in my P.O. box. But I'm also a curious guy. The dark web has always intrigued me. Up until a few days ago, I had been on there to buy some drugs off sites some of my friends gave to me. But late one night, I was sober and at home, which was a rare thing for me. So since I was bored, I decided to boot up my Tor browser and try to see what sort of fucked up shit I could find on the dark web. If you've ever been on the dark web, you'll know that you can't just search up Red Rooms or Hitman for Hire and get results. No, you have to find links to these websites first. So I hopped onto Google again to try and find some links to a messed up website. I know it's weird that I was actually searching for the worst. But as soon as I got on the dark web that night, I had a sense of morbid curiosity come over me. Anyways, I spent a little while trying to find some links. Anything that I found was either too tame for me, or the links didn't work. At this point, I was about ready to give up, and I wish I had. But in one final attempt, I clicked on Reddit, hopping onto r/deepweb. I didn't think I would find anything, so I just scrolled through hot for about half an hour before sorting to new. Then I found it. One simple text post titled, Slayer's Assassination and Life Ruining Services. In the text box, there was a post with what seemed to be just a random assortment of numbers and letters. It took my tired brain a second to figure out what it was, but I realized pretty quickly it was a link, presumably to a Hitman website. So I decided to paste the link into my dark web browser, and what do you know, it worked. But before I decided to go any further, I figured I should go back to the OP's profile to see if they have posted any other dark web links. However, when I went back to the post in question, OP's profile was deleted. Weird. Anyway, I reopened my dark web tab and hopped onto the site. Up along to the top of the website was its name, Slayer's Assassination and Life Ruining Services, and next to it was what looked to be a skull inside of a crosshair. I chuckled when I saw that. This site must be fake. Upon scrolling down, however, I was not disappointed. There was a paragraph of white text on a black background, and a small box to the right of the text that just said place an order. The text was the main part though, as it took up most of the page. It read, Slayer's Assassination and Life Ruining Services offers everything from acid attack, crippling, blinding, castration, torture, rape, beatings, and good old death. We have the lowest prices out of any other company running similar services, and we are worldwide. We have a dedicated and experienced group of staff based all over the world. So if you need someone to be assassinated, or maybe you just want them scared for life, don't hesitate to contact us. Again, I laughed. This had to be satire, right? Hell, I was even tempted to order it on someone just to see what would happen. Ironically, I actually have a half-decent job, so I can afford to. Better not risk it, though, I thought to myself. I was about to close my computer and call it a night when I heard a knock at the door. I live alone, so it was unusual to get visitors, especially so late at night. But when I opened my door, it was just my good buddy Mark, who also happened to be my weed plug. As I opened the door, he didn't hesitate to let himself in, and shove a big baggie full of pot on my face. This dude is the best shit I've had in a minute. We gotta try some. I couldn't say no. Cut to a couple hours later, it's early morning, and Mark and I are chilling on my couch, both blazed as fuck. He suddenly decides to get up, and I assume he's going to get some leftover pizza. But he walks over to my desk and my computer. Slayer's assassination. Are you gonna kill someone or something? He mutters. What? I reply. Your computer, dude. It's got some hacker shit on it. It's the dark web, man. Don't fuck with it. At this point, I'm still on my couch, half asleep and not paying full attention. However, I sat up pretty fast when he said the words, Hey man, let's order a hitman on you. I hopped up and walked over to my PC. Part of my brain was screaming no. What the fuck are you doing? But the majority of my brain, which was also the high part, was thinking about how funny it would be to order a hitman on myself. So I agree. I did make him get out of my chair though, because I didn't want him seeing what my credit card numbers were as I transferred some Bitcoin. At the end, after I wrote down all my personal details, like my address, age, and even a photo, I had to select what I want happened to me. I just selected plain old assassination, as it was actually cheaper than some of the other things. I could have paid an extra couple of grand to be beaten before my death, but even my high brain didn't want to splash the cash too much on my own death. God, this is ridiculous. Anyways, I placed the order and then replied to a confirmation email, and boom, it was done. A couple of clicks and I had ordered myself on the dark web. Mark and I laughed about it for a while, but then he left about an hour later and I fell asleep not too long after. I woke up around 9 a.m., which meant I got at least 6 hours of sleep, even if it felt like I got 3. I got up out of bed, threw on some track pants and a cotton shirt. Yes, I sleep naked, and I brewed myself a coffee before sitting down to play some games and just enjoy my Sunday. You can imagine how shocked I was when I saw that I had ordered my death the previous night. Even though I thought that the site was bullshit, I still felt a pit open in my stomach. Even when I'm high, I usually make sensible decisions, I chuckled. Not like I can remember it anyway. But I guess Mark's new shit was really good. I would assume a normal human being would do something else, but I was still kind of out of it from the night before, so I just carried on with my day. I was a little more paranoid, sure, but as I said, I just assumed it was bullshit. I even laughed at the email I got from the website, saying that their hitman has been dispatched and was on its way. It was like ordering a package off Amazon. I was tempted to email back and ask for some day delivery, but I didn't need to ask, because that's exactly what I got. I didn't see it arrive, but around the time I started to cook myself a shitty dinner, I noticed a blacked out sedan parked on the side of the road from my house. I didn't live in a rural area, but there is a lot of trees and bushes between each of the houses on my street, so I'd be surprised if any other houses saw the car except mine. At this point, I was freaking out. What if this site was real? Even though I'm a big guy, I was freaking out. I didn't own any weapons, aside from a slightly larger than average kitchen knife. Fuck it. I'm confronting it, I decided. I put on a hoodie and slid the knife into the front pocket, before waltzing out of my house and walking right up to the driver's side window of the vehicle. Even I was astounded at my own courage. Knocking on the window, nothing happened. It was rather anticlimactic. I was fully prepared to have a fight for my life, all because I did something really dumb while I was baked. But like I said, nothing happened. I even put my head right up to the window. as if there was a reflection to try to get a better look to see what was inside. I could barely see what was inside the car, but all I could make out was 2 empty seats. No one was even inside. I had got all hyped up for nothing. I decided to wait out by the car for a bit, but after half an hour or so I was hungry, and I had to go back inside to take my dinner out of the oven. I swear, it was only a minute between me going inside to take my dinner out of the oven and looking back out the window, and the car being gone. I didn't even hear it go. Guess I'm eating my dinner with all my curtains closed and doors locked, I muttered to myself. I just started to calm down when the power shut off. It was sunny outside, and coupled with the car, I now knew that this was the real deal. I had signed my own death warrant. I ran into my upstairs bedroom and locked the door, and then hid under the bed. I couldn't at all call the cops. What would I say? Oh yes, hello sir. Turns out while super high I paid $5,000 for an anonymous hitman to kill me, and now he's arrived. Send an officer, ASAP. Please and thank you. So I just stayed hiding under my bed. I still am now. I've been here for half an hour now writing this. Think of this as an epitaph. I know I'm screwed. Just a minute ago I heard my back door slowly creak open. This piece of writing may seem humorous to you, the reader, but in reality as you read this, I'm under my bed, praying to a God that lost all faith in me years ago to spare me, to let me go. But I know that won't happen. My bedroom door just opened, and I can see a big pair of black boots.